The massive crystal doors of the Galactic Council chambers stood 30 feet tall and gleamed like captured starlight. Ambassador Lee Taemin walked toward them alone, his black diplomatic uniform a stark contrast against the rainbow-colored walls of Nexus Prime's greatest building. His footsteps echoed in the vast hallway, the only sound breaking the nervous silence that filled the air. Other beings watched him from the sides of the corridor. They stood in tight groups, never alone, never without their guards and advisors surrounding them. The insect-like Vectar delegates clicked their mandibles anxiously as they saw the human approach. Their 6 legs shuffled against the smooth floor, and their compound eyes reflected dozens of images of the lone figure walking past them. "Look at him," whispered one Vectar to another in their clicking language. "Walking by himself again. How does he not fear for his safety?" The aquatic Mirloth floated in their mobile water tanks, surrounded by at least 4 attendants each. Their blue-green skin rippled with concern as they watched Taemin pass. One of them pressed a tentacle against the glass of his tank and spoke to his companion through the water's vibrations. "The human shows no signs of distress," the Mirloth observed. "If I were separated from my pod for even an hour, I would lose my mind. Yet he walks as if he carries his entire species with him." Near the main entrance, the towering Drakmori warriors stood in formation. Each one was 8 feet tall with scales that looked like living armor. Despite their fearsome appearance, they traveled in groups of 6, never fewer. Their leader, Warchief Groktar, watched the human with something that might have been respect. "That small creature has more courage than warriors twice his size," Groktar rumbled to his second-in-command. "Or perhaps he is simply too foolish to understand danger." Captain Park Sora stood on the observation deck above the main hall. She wore the blue uniform of human diplomatic security and watched her ambassador with pride. She had seen this scene many times before, but it never failed to amaze her. Every other species needed their support groups, their advisors, their guards. But humans walked the council halls alone. Sora remembered her first day on this assignment 5 years ago. She had been shocked to learn that humans were the only species with this privilege. Every other delegation required at least 3 members to enter the council chambers. Most brought 5 or more. The Vectar Queen speaker never traveled with fewer than 12 attendants, but Ambassador Taemin carried only a simple, black briefcase and the authority of Earth itself. The energy-based Lumnari flickered nervously in their containment suits as Taemin approached the main doors. These beings were pure energy held together by advanced technology, and they always traveled in connected groups. If one Lumnari was separated from the others, their energy patterns would become unstable within minutes. How does the human maintain his pattern integrity without connection to his kind? One Lumnari asked another through their electrical communication method. It should be impossible for any conscious being to function alone. Taemin reached the great doors and placed his hand on the scanner. The device read his genetic signature and confirmed his identity. The doors began to open with a deep musical sound that resonated through the crystal structure of the building. As the ambassador stepped through the doorway, conversations stopped throughout the hall. Beings from dozens of different worlds watched in fascination and fear. Some admired the human's confidence. Others worried about what kind of creature could walk alone without going insane. Inside the council chamber, the atmosphere was even more intense. The room was designed like an ancient amphitheater, with curved rows of seats rising toward the ceiling. Each species had their designated area, and most were filled with multiple delegates, advisors, and support staff. The human section had only one chair. Taemin walked down the central aisle toward his seat. Representatives from over 40 different worlds watched his progress. The chamber's acoustic design meant that even the smallest sound could be heard clearly, so his footsteps seemed to drum out a rhythm of confidence and determination. The hegemony faction, led by Chancellor Vexthal, occupied the largest section of the chamber. The hegemony represented the oldest and most traditional species in the galaxy. They believed in hierarchy, group decision-making, and the wisdom of committees. The sight of a single human making decisions for his entire species disturbed them deeply. Chancellor Vexthal was a tall, thin being with gray skin and 4 arms. His species, the Kondari, had evolved from herd animals and felt physical pain when separated from their groups. The idea that humans could function alone seemed unnatural and dangerous to him. "The human approaches," Vexthal said to his advisor. "I still cannot understand how the Council permits this behavior. No being should wield such individual authority." His advisor, a younger Kondari named Felu, nodded in agreement. Perhaps their isolation is why they make such unpredictable decisions, Chancellor. A being without proper group guidance cannot think clearly. Tamian reached his seat and set down his briefcase. He did not look around nervously or check for threats like other species did. He simply sat down and opened his briefcase to review his notes for the day's session. The contrast was striking. In every other section of the chamber, delegates huddled with their teams, sharing information and seeking consensus. The Vectar Queen Speaker was surrounded by 12 advisors who constantly fed her information through their hive-mind connection. The Murloth delegation shared thoughts through biochemical signals released into their shared water system. Even the mighty Drakmori war chiefs consulted with their clan advisors before making any statement. But Tamian sat alone, calm and prepared. The session bell rang, and Council Speaker Mordain called the assembly to order. Mordain was one of the ancient Kethmori, a species that looked like living trees and had served as neutral mediators for thousands of years. Today we discuss the admission of 3 new species to the Galactic Council, Mordain announced. His voice carried the weight of centuries. The decision will require careful consideration of each species' ability to participate in our democratic process. As the discussion began, it became clear why the human privilege was so important. Other species needed time to consult with their groups to reach consensus, to ensure that every decision reflected the will of their entire delegation. Debates moved slowly as each faction took breaks to discuss among themselves. But when Tamian spoke, his words carried immediate authority. He did not need to check with advisors or request time to consult with Earth. He spoke for humanity with complete confidence, and everyone in the chamber knew that his words represented the true position of his species. Earth supports the admission of the Naltari people, Tamian stated clearly. Their peaceful nature and technological contributions will benefit the entire council. There was no hesitation in his voice, no uncertainty. Other delegates marveled at this display of individual authority. In their cultures, such decisive action without group consultation would be seen as dangerous arrogance. As the session continued, Zora watched from the observation deck and reflected on the history that had led to this moment. The privilege of walking alone had not been given freely. Humanity had earned it through 2 centuries of consistent behavior, proven reliability, and demonstrated wisdom. But not everyone in the galaxy was comfortable with this arrangement. Some species viewed human independence as a threat to the traditional order. Others worried about the precedent it set. A few openly questioned whether any being should be trusted with such individual authority. The day's session ended with several important votes, and Tamian participated in each one with the same calm confidence he had shown upon entering. As the delegates began to file out, he gathered his materials and prepared to leave. Once again, he would walk the crystal corridors alone, carrying the weight of humanity's decisions with him. And once again, the galaxy would wonder at the strange species that needed no companions to feel complete. The mystery of human independence continued to fascinate and disturb the council in equal measure, but none of them yet understood the true reason why humans alone possessed this extraordinary privilege. Ambassador Lee Tae-min sat in his private quarters aboard the diplomatic station, staring at an old photograph. The image showed a human fleet in formation against the backdrop of a dying star. In the center of the formation was the famous ship that had changed everything, the UES Determination, commanded by Captain Yoon Ji-ho 200 years ago. Tomorrow's council vote would be crucial, and Taemin needed to remember why humans had earned their unique privilege. The memory of the Korthak Rebellion still echoed through galactic politics, and younger species often forgot the lessons learned in those dark days. The trouble had started when the Korthak Empire decided to expand beyond their traditional borders. The Korthak were a warrior species, brutal and efficient, who believed that strength gave them the right to rule over weaker peoples. They had conquered 12 star systems before the Galactic Council finally decided to act. Admiral Kim Do-hyun had been in command of the human fleet in the Outer Rim territories when the call for help came. The Council's message was urgent. The Korthak were moving toward the Kepler system, where over 3 billion innocent civilians lived on various colonies and space stations. All available fleets are to converge on Kepler's gate, the message had said. Coordinate with Council forces for maximum effectiveness against Korthak expansion. Do-hyun had immediately ordered his fleet to jump to the Kepler system. The human ships were not the largest or most powerful in the galaxy, but they were known for their reliability and their crew's determination. Earth had committed 47 vessels to the defense, including 3 heavy cruisers and the flagship UES Determination. But when the human fleet arrived at the rendezvous point, something was wrong. The Council forces were positioned incorrectly, and the intelligence they provided did not match what human sensors were detecting. Dr. Choi Min-ae, a human scientist working with the Council's research division, had grown suspicious of the data they were receiving. Min-ae had been studying Korthak battle patterns for months, and she knew their tactics better than most. When she analyzed the Council's battle plan, she realized it was designed to use the human fleet as bait. The plan would put human ships directly in the path of the Korthak main force while keeping Council vessels safely out of range. Admiral, Min-ae had reported to Do-hyun over a secure channel, "The intelligence is false. The Council is setting us up to take the worst casualties while they position themselves for an easy victory." Do-hyun had studied the evidence carefully. The pattern was clear. Chancellor Vexthal and his faction had decided that human losses were acceptable if it meant preserving Council ships and lives. They saw humanity as a useful tool, nothing more. The discovery should have led to an immediate withdrawal. Any other species would have pulled back, demanded explanation, or refused to participate in a battle where they were being deliberately sacrificed. The Murloth had done exactly that in a similar situation 50 years earlier, and the Vectar had protocols that required immediate retreat if their allies proved untrustworthy. But humans were different. Admiral Do-hyun called a fleet meeting and shared Min-ae's findings with his captains. The room fell silent as the implications became clear. Then Captain Yoon Ji-ho, the youngest ship commander in the fleet, stood up and spoke the words that would be remembered for centuries. "So what?" Ji-ho said simply. "Those civilians still need our help. The Korthak are still coming. Does it matter if the Council wants to use us? We came here to protect innocent people, not to play politics." One by one, the other captains agreed. They would fight anyway, even knowing they were being betrayed. They would trust in their own abilities and their own principles, regardless of what their allies intended. The Battle of Kepler's Gate began at dawn on March 15, 2823. The Korthak fleet was massive, over 200 warships supported by countless smaller vessels. They came through the hyperspace jump point like a storm of destruction, weapons already charging and shields at maximum power. The Council plan unfolded exactly as Min-ae had predicted. The human fleet found itself directly in the path of the Korthak advance, while Council forces hung back, claiming technical difficulties and communication problems. It was a trap and everyone knew it, but the humans fought anyway. Captain Ji-ho's ship, the UES Determination, led the charge directly into the center of the Korthak formation. The ship was a heavy cruiser, powerful but not designed for suicide missions. Against the entire Korthak fleet, it should have been destroyed in minutes. Instead, it fought for 18 hours. The Determination used every trick in the human tactical manual. Ji-ho ordered his crew to target specific weak points in Korthak ship designs, patterns that Min-ae had identified through her research. The ship danced between the massive enemy vessels, too small and fast for their main weapons to track effectively. When the Determination's shields failed, Ji-ho didn't retreat. When the hull was breached in 47 places, the crew sealed themselves in emergency compartments and kept fighting. When life support began failing, they switched to emergency oxygen and continued the battle. The rest of the human fleet followed Ji-ho's example. Ship after ship took damage that should have been fatal, but their crews refused to give up. Human engineering teams performed miracles, keeping weapons online with jury-rigged repairs and maintaining thrust with damaged engines. The Korthak began to falter. They had expected quick victory against a small force, but the humans would not break. Every time a Korthak ship moved to attack the civilian stations, human vessels appeared to block them. The enemy found themselves trapped in a grinding battle of attrition, with opponents who seemed incapable of surrender. Meanwhile, the Council forces remained at safe distance, officially maintaining their position while unofficially waiting for the humans to be destroyed so they could sweep in and claim victory over the weakened Korthak fleet. But Dr. Min-ae was busy with her own mission. She had used her access to Council communications to document everything. The false intelligence, the deliberate positioning, the plan to sacrifice human lives. She broadcast this evidence on all frequencies, ensuring that every species in the galaxy would know about the betrayal. The revelation changed everything. Other species began demanding explanations from their council representatives. The Drakmori war chiefs declared the plan without honor and threatened to withdraw from the alliance. Even the energy-based Lumnari, who rarely involved themselves in political disputes, expressed shock at the deception, but the humans kept fighting. As the battle entered its second day, reinforcements finally arrived. Not council ships, but vessels from a dozen different species who had heard Mine's broadcast and decided to help. The Korthak found themselves facing a united fleet that fought with the same determination they had seen from the humans. The final moment came when Captain Jiho's ship, now barely functional and held together by emergency repairs, made one last attack run. The determination rammed the Korthak flagship, its hull splitting apart but its weapons still firing until the very end. The Korthak fleet broke and retreated, leaving behind nearly half their ships. The civilian colonies were saved, and the galaxy had learned something important about humanity. They could be betrayed, used, and abandoned, but they would still do the right thing. They fought not for political advantage or personal gain, but for principles that seemed to come from within each individual human. No external authority needed to tell them what was right. The Council's investigation into the battle took months, but the outcome was inevitable. Chancellor Vexthul was removed from power, and new protocols were established to prevent such betrayals in the future. More importantly, humanity was granted a unique status within the Council. From that day forward, humans would be trusted to act independently, without the group oversight required of other species. They had proven that they could make the right decisions even when isolated from their command structure and betrayed by their allies. Taman closed the photograph and prepared for bed. Tomorrow's vote would be important, but he was not worried. He carried the memory of Captain Jiho's sacrifice and the knowledge that human principles did not depend on external validation. The galaxy had learned to trust humans not because they were perfect, but because they were consistent. Even when alone, even when betrayed, they would still choose to do what was right. Dr. Oh Sung-min walked through the research laboratories of the Galactic Institute, his tablet filled with data that would change how the universe understood humanity. For 3 years, he had been studying the psychological differences between species, trying to answer a question that had puzzled scientists across the galaxy. Why were humans the only beings who could function effectively alone? The answer, he had discovered, lay in evolution itself. Sung-min stopped at the observation window of Laboratory 7, where a Vectar researcher named Clicktar was participating in an isolation study. The insect-like being sat in a comfortable room with everything needed for survival: food, water, entertainment, and communication devices. But after only 6 hours of separation from other Vectar, Clicktar was already showing signs of severe distress. The creature's compound eyes had lost their usual bright focus and now stared blankly at the walls. Its 6 legs trembled constantly, and it had stopped responding to questions from the research team. According to the monitors, Clicktar's brain activity was becoming increasingly erratic. "How much longer can we safely continue?" asked Dr. Yelnara, the Vectar scientist overseeing the experiment. "Not much longer," Sung-min replied, making notes on his tablet. "Your species shows complete psychological breakdown after approximately 8 hours of isolation. We'll need to end this soon." Yelnara's mandibles clicked with worry. "I still cannot understand how humans endure such conditions. In our history, isolation from the hive is the worst punishment possible. Most of our criminals prefer execution to solitary confinement." Sung-min had heard similar comments from researchers of every species. What humans considered normal behavior seemed impossible to the rest of the galaxy. The study results were consistent across all non-human species. Separation from their social groups caused rapid mental deterioration. The Merloth lasted slightly longer than the Vectar, but after 12 hours alone, they entered a catatonic state and would die within days if not reunited with their pods. The aquatic beings literally could not survive without the constant biochemical communication they shared with others of their kind. The energy-based Lumnari fared even worse. Their consciousness was so dependent on connection with other Lumnari that isolation caused their energy patterns to destabilize within minutes. Illuminari alone would simply cease to exist, their consciousness dissolving into random electrical impulses. Even the mighty Drakmori warriors, despite their fearsome appearance and proud traditions, became helpless when separated from their clans. Seung-min had observed War Chief Groktar during a brief isolation test, and the 8-foot-tall warrior had curled into a ball and whimpered like a lost child after just 4 hours alone. But humans were different. Seung-min had volunteers who had spent weeks in isolation with no ill effects beyond boredom. Some even seemed to thrive in solitude, using the time for reflection and creative thinking. The key, Seung-min had realized, was in humanity's evolutionary history. Most species in the galaxy had evolved on worlds where survival meant staying with the group at all costs. The Vectar had developed from colony insects where individual identity barely existed. The Merloth came from ocean environments where lone individuals were quickly eaten by predators. The Drakmori evolved from pack hunters who shared everything from food to thoughts. But Earth had been different. Humans had evolved as persistence hunters in a world where survival sometimes required individuals to leave the safety of the group. A human might track prey for days across dangerous terrain, completely alone, before returning to share the kill with their tribe. This evolutionary pressure had created something unique: the ability to carry social structure internally. While other species needed constant connection to their groups to maintain their identity and decision-making ability, humans had learned to internalize their entire social framework. Agent Kang Hyejin provided the perfect example of this ability. She had been captured during a covert mission to infiltrate a Korthak prison colony and had spent 6 months in solitary confinement. Any other species would have suffered complete mental breakdown within days. Instead, Hyejin had used the time to plan an escape. Seung-min reviewed her case files with fascination. During her imprisonment, Hyejin had maintained detailed mental maps of the prison, tracked guard rotations through sound patterns, and even organized a coordinated escape using only coded messages tapped through the walls to other prisoners. The prison records showed that she had never shown signs of psychological distress. When interrogated, she gave only name, rank, and service number exactly as her training required. When tortured, she revealed nothing useful. When offered bribes or better treatment in exchange for cooperation, she politely declined. The Korthak guards had been baffled. In their experience, isolation was the most effective torture possible. Every other species they had captured broke within days when separated from their social groups. But Hyejin seemed completely unaffected. "It's like she carries her entire command structure inside her head," one guard had reported. "She acts with the same authority and confidence as if she were surrounded by her entire military unit." That observation had been more accurate than the Korthak realized. Humans did carry their command structure internally. Through evolution, they had developed the ability to simulate social interaction within their own minds. They could imagine the advice their friends would give, consider how their leaders would react, and make decisions based on internalized cultural values. Seung-min walked to the next laboratory, where a very different experiment was taking place. Human volunteers were being tested to see how long they could function effectively while completely isolated from all external human contact. Private Lim Jae-won had been alone for 43 days and was still performing all assigned tasks with normal efficiency. He exercised daily, maintained detailed logs, and even continued learning new skills through educational programs. His psychological evaluations showed no signs of distress or mental deterioration. "How are you feeling today, Private Lim?" Seung-min asked through the communication system. "Fine, sir," Jae-won replied without hesitation. "I finished reading the tactical manual you recommended and wrote a report on potential improvements to our defensive protocols. I also started learning the Merloth language. Did you know they have 37 different words for loneliness? Fascinating species." Seung-min made notes on his tablet. After 43 days of complete isolation, Jae-won was not only functioning normally but was actually being productive and showing curiosity about other species. Such behavior would be impossible for any other known form of intelligent life. The implications were staggering. Humans could be trusted to act independently because they were the only species capable of maintaining their full decision-making abilities without external social support. Every other species required constant connection to their groups to function properly. This explained why the council had eventually granted humans the privilege of walking alone in the council halls. It wasn't really a privilege at all, it was a recognition of unique capability. Humans were the only species who could be trusted to represent their entire civilization in individual decisions because they carried that civilization within themselves. Dr. Song Hyo-jin, a human anthropologist working with Sung-min's team, had provided additional insight into this phenomenon. Her research showed that human languages contained unique concepts that didn't exist in other species' communication systems. We have words for independence, self-reliance, and individual responsibility that simply cannot be translated into other languages, Song had explained. The Vectar language has no concept of individual identity separate from the hive. The Murloth have 17 different terms for group harmony, but none for personal autonomy. This linguistic difference reflected deeper psychological realities. Humans thought about themselves as individuals who chose to cooperate with groups, while other species thought of themselves as extensions of groups who could not exist independently. The research also explained why other species found human behavior so unpredictable and sometimes frightening. When a Vectar made a decision, it reflected the consensus of their entire hive mind. When a Murloth acted, they did so based on the collective wisdom of their pod. But when a human made a choice, it came from an internal process that other species couldn't understand or predict. Sung-min compiled his final report as he walked back to his office. The data was clear. Humans weren't just psychologically capable of functioning alone. They were the only species in the galaxy with this ability. Every other form of intelligent life required social connection, not just for happiness but for basic mental stability. This unique trait explained everything, from human military effectiveness to their success in diplomatic situations. A human soldier could continue fighting even when cut off from all support. A human diplomat could make binding decisions without needing to consult with committees or councils. But perhaps most importantly, it explained why humans could be trusted with individual authority. They didn't need external oversight to make good decisions because they had evolved the ability to provide that oversight themselves through internal social modeling. As Sung-min reached his office, he realized that his research had answered more than just as the alarm bells echoed through the crystal corridors of the council headquarters, as Ambassador Lee Tae-min hurried toward the main chamber. Emergency lights flashed red and blue, casting strange shadows on the walls. Something was very wrong at Nexus Prime, and the timing could not have been worse. Today was supposed to be the final vote on admitting 3 new species to the Galactic Council. The Naltari, the Zephani, and the Morkol had all been waiting for months to learn if they would be accepted into the galactic community. Instead, the station was under attack. Security Chief Lim Jae-won met Tae-min at the main entrance to the council chambers. His face was grim as he delivered the situation report. "Terrorists from the Purity Alliance," Jae-won said quickly. "They call themselves the True Galaxy Movement, and they're led by someone named Nexgor. They've taken control of the communication center and activated some kind of neural disruptor." Tae-min frowned as they walked quickly through the corridors. The Purity Alliance was a radical group that opposed expansion of the council. They believed that too many species were being admitted too quickly, and that the galaxy should be governed only by the pure races that had founded the original alliance centuries ago. "What does the neural disruptor do?" Tae-min asked. "It cuts all communication links between species delegations and their home governments," Jae-won explained. "No quantum entanglement communications, no hyperspace transmissions, nothing. Every delegation is completely cut off from external contact." As they reached the main chamber, the scope of the crisis became clear. The vast amphitheater was in chaos, but not in the way Tae-min expected. Instead of panic and shouting, there was an eerie silence broken only by strange behaviors from different species groups. The Vectar delegation had abandoned their seats entirely and were building some kind of defensive structure using chairs and tables. Their movements were frantic and uncoordinated, completely unlike their usual disciplined hive mind efficiency. Queen Speaker Zithara stood in the center of the makeshift fortress, her compound eyes darting in all directions as if she expected attack from everywhere at once. "They've lost connection to their hive mind," Jae-won observed. "Without constant contact with their homeworld, the individual Vectar can't function properly. They're reverting to basic survival instincts." The Murloth delegation was in even worse condition. Their mobile water tanks had been connected together into a cluster, and the aquatic beings inside were barely moving. Their normally bright blue-green skin had turned a sickly pale color, and their tentacles drooped limply in the water. Biochemical communication breakdown, Taemin realized. They're literally poisoning themselves with stress chemicals because they can't share the load with their pod back home. Near the center of the chamber, the energy-based Luminari were flickering erratically between their various states of existence. Their containment suits sparked and hummed as the beings inside struggled to maintain coherent consciousness without their network connection. One Luminari had already lost cohesion entirely, becoming nothing more than random electrical patterns dancing in his empty suit. Even the mighty Drakmori were affected. The 8-foot-tall warriors had formed a tight circle with their backs to each other, but instead of looking outward for threats, they were staring at the floor and making low, moaning sounds. War Chief Groktar, normally the most commanding presence in the chamber, was rocking back and forth like a lost child. "It's exactly what Dr. O predicted," Taemin said quietly. Cut off from their social networks, every other species loses the ability to function rationally. But in the human section of the chamber, everything was different. Ambassador Taemin walked calmly to his seat and opened his briefcase as if nothing unusual was happening. He reviewed his notes for the day's votes and checked his schedule. When a Vegtar chair went flying past his head as part of their frantic construction project, he simply ducked slightly and continued reading. Security Chief Jae-won took position near the human section and began coordinating with other human personnel throughout the station. Without any need for external authorization, he started organizing rescue operations for delegates who were in immediate medical danger. "Major Bae, what's your status?" Jae-won spoke into his communicator. "We've located the source of the neural disruptor," came the reply from Major Bae Young-soo, who was leading a team of human marines through the station's lower levels. "It's in the main communication center, heavily defended. We're moving to neutralize it." The difference was striking. While every other species in the chamber had become non-functional without their external connections, the humans were operating with their usual efficiency. They didn't need to contact Earth for instructions or wait for consensus from other humans. They simply did what needed to be done. Council Speaker Mordain, one of the ancient tree-like Kethmori, struggled to maintain order from the central podium. His species was less affected by the disruption than others, but even the Kethmori showed signs of distress without their connection to the great forest mind of their home world. "The session is temporarily suspended," Mordain announced, his voice carrying less authority than usual. "All delegations should remain in their designated areas until communications are restored." But the human delegation wasn't waiting for communications to be restored. They were working to fix the problem themselves. "Sir," Jae-won said to Taemin, "Major Bae's team has encountered heavy resistance. The terrorists have sealed themselves in the communication center with advanced weaponry. Our Marines are pinned down." Taemin considered the situation carefully. In normal circumstances, this would require consultation with Earth Command, approval from the Defense Ministry, and coordination with Council security forces. But communications were down, Council security was paralyzed by the same disruption affecting the delegates, and people were dying. Any other species would be frozen by the inability to get authorization from their home governments. But humans had evolved to function independently when necessary. "Tell Major Bae to continue the mission," Taemin decided. "Use whatever force is necessary to stop the neural disruptor. I'll take full responsibility for the decision." The authority in his voice was absolute. He wasn't guessing about what Earth would want or hoping he was making the right choice. He knew that stopping the terrorist attack was the correct action, and he had the psychological capability to make that decision without external validation. Meanwhile, Major Bae and his team were demonstrating the same independent capability in the station's lower levels. When an explosion separated Bae from his squad, any other species soldiers would have retreated to regroup or waited for new orders. But Bae continued the mission alone. The human marine moved through the darkened corridors with practiced efficiency. He had memorized the station's layout during his briefing and could navigate without assistance. When he encountered terrorist guards, he engaged them with calm professionalism. When his communication equipment was damaged by weapons fire, he didn't panic or retreat. Instead, he improvised. Bae found an access panel and began rewiring the station's internal communication system. Using knowledge from his technical training, He created a localized network that bypassed the neural disruptor's effects. Within minutes, he had restored limited communication between the scattered human teams. "All units, this is Major Bay." His voice crackled through the improvised system. "I've reached the communication center. The terrorist leader Nexigor has demands he wants to broadcast to the galaxy." Through his makeshift communication link, Bay transmitted Nexigor's message to the council chamber. The terrorist leader appeared on the main display screen, his alien features twisted with fanatic determination. "Citizens of the galaxy," Nexigor announced, "today you see the weakness of your so-called council. When cut off from their puppet masters, your leaders become helpless animals. The Vectar build meaningless barriers. The Murloth withdraw into themselves. The Drakmori cower like frightened children." The camera panned across the chaos in the council chamber, showing the breakdown of every non-human delegation. The terrorists' point was clear. If the council could be paralyzed so easily, how could they govern a galaxy? Only the pure species, those who founded the original alliance, should have the right to govern, Nexigor continued. These newer races, these weak creatures who cannot even think without constant guidance, have no place in positions of authority. But as the camera continued panning, it reached the human section of the chamber. Ambassador Tai Min sat calmly in his chair, still reviewing his notes and completely unaffected by the chaos around him. Security Chief Jae-won continued coordinating rescue operations, and human medical teams were already helping delegates from other species who had collapsed. The contrast was unmistakable. While every other species had broken down when isolated from their support networks, the humans continued to function with their usual competence and authority. Nexigor's expression changed as he realized that his demonstration wasn't having the intended effect. The humans were proving exactly the opposite of his point, that individual capability and independent decision-making were not weaknesses, but strengths. Destroy the human section. Major Bay Youngsu moved through the smoke-filled communication center like a force of nature. The terrorist leader Nexigor had barricaded himself behind overturned computer terminals, but his crude defenses were no match for human determination and training. "You cannot stop the truth," Nexigor shouted as Bay advanced steadily through the room. "The galaxy has seen how weak your council really is." When separated from their masters, they become nothing. Bay didn't respond with words. Instead, he demonstrated exactly why humans were different from every other species in the galaxy. Cut off from his unit, isolated from all external support, and facing superior numbers, he continued his mission with the same calm efficiency he would have shown with full backup. The neural disruptor sat in the center of the room, a complex device that looked like a metal flower with dozens of crystalline petals. Each petal broadcast a different frequency, designed to block specific types of interspecies communication. Bay studied the device for 30 seconds, then began systematically destroying the transmission nodes. "Stop," Nexigor screamed, firing his weapon wildly. "You don't understand what you're doing. The council needs to see their weakness." But Bay understood perfectly. He knew that other species would view their breakdown during the crisis as a sign of fundamental inadequacy. What they didn't realize was that their reaction was completely normal for beings who had evolved to function as part of collective groups. The last transmission node sparked and died under Bay's precise demolition work. Throughout the station, communication links began re-establishing themselves as the neural disruptor's effects faded away. In the council chamber, the change was immediate and dramatic. The Vectar delegation suddenly stopped their frantic construction project as their hive mind connection restored itself. Queen Speaker Zithara blinked her compound eyes in confusion as her usual mental clarity returned. What were we doing?" she asked, looking at the makeshift barrier her people had built from furniture. The Merloth in their water tanks began to regain their normal coloration as biochemical communication resumed with their home pod. Their tentacles moved with renewed purpose, and the stress chemicals that had been poisoning them were quickly neutralized by shared processing. The Luminari stopped flickering and stabilized into their normal energy patterns. Their consciousness, which had been fragmenting without network connection, reformed into coherent thought as they reconnected with their collective existence. Even the mighty Drakmori warriors straightened up as their clan bonds reasserted themselves. War Chief Groktar shook his massive head and looked around in embarrassment. The proud warrior had been reduced to a whimpering child by 30 minutes of isolation, and the memory would haunt him for years. But in the human section, nothing changed at all. Ambassador Lee Taemin continued reviewing his notes exactly as he had been doing throughout the crisis. Security Chief Lim Jae-won finished coordinating the rescue operations and began filing his incident report. The human medical teams continued treating injured delegates from other species, their work uninterrupted by the restoration of communications. Council Speaker Mordain called for order as the chaos in the chamber subsided. The ancient Keth Mori looked shaken by the experience, his tree-like form trembling slightly as he addressed the assembly. "The terrorist attack has been neutralized," Mordain announced. "Communications with all homeworlds have been restored. We will now proceed with today's scheduled votes on the admission of new species to the Council." But before the voting could begin, Chancellor Felux of the Hegemony faction stood up. The young Kundari had replaced the disgraced Vexthul years earlier, and he had learned important lessons from his predecessor's mistakes. "Council Speaker," Felu said formally, "before we proceed, I believe we must address what has happened here today. The terrorist attack was designed to demonstrate that our council system is weak and ineffective. I fear that in some ways it succeeded." A murmur of concern went through the chamber. Many delegates were still embarrassed by their behavior during the communications blackout. The idea that the galaxy had witnessed their breakdown was deeply disturbing. However, Felu continued, the attack also demonstrated something far more important. It showed us why the human privilege exists and why it is not really a privilege at all. Ambassador Taemin looked up from his notes, curious about where this was leading. He had expected criticism for taking independent action during the crisis, not praise. "Every species in this chamber," Felu explained, "reacted to isolation in exactly the same way. We lost our ability to think clearly, to make rational decisions, to function as representatives of our civilizations. This is not a weakness, it is simply how we evolved. Our species survived by staying connected to our groups, and we cannot function effectively when that connection is severed." The Chancellor gestured toward the human section of the chamber. "But humanity is different. When Ambassador Taemin was cut off from Earth, he continued to work. When Security Chief Jae-won lost contact with Human Command, he continued to coordinate rescue operations. When Major Bae was separated from his unit, he completed his mission alone." Dr. Song Hyo-jin, who had been observing the crisis from the research section, stood up to address the chamber. As one of the galaxy's leading experts on interspecies psychology, her words carried significant weight. "What Chancellor Felu says is correct," Song announced. "Our recent research has confirmed that humans are the only known species capable of maintaining full decision-making ability when isolated from their social networks. Every other form of intelligent life requires constant connection to their groups for basic psychological stability." She activated a holographic display, showing brain scans from various species during isolation. "The Vectar literally cannot think individual thoughts without their hive mind connection. The Murloth enter toxic shock when separated from their pods. The Lumnari cease to exist as conscious beings without their energy networks." The display showed human brain scans during the same isolation periods. Unlike the chaotic patterns from other species, human neural activity remained stable and organized even after weeks of solitude. "Humans evolved differently," Song explained. "They developed the ability to internalize their entire social structure, to carry the wisdom and authority of their civilization within each individual. This is why they can make binding decisions without external consultation. They don't need to contact their groups because they carry those groups within themselves." Council Speaker Mordain nodded slowly as the implications became clear. "So the human privilege is not a special favor granted by the Council. It is recognition of a unique capability that no other species possesses." "Exactly," Song confirmed. "Humans walk alone in these halls not because they are antisocial or arrogant, but because they are the only beings psychologically equipped to represent an entire civilization through individual action." War Chief Grok Tar of the Drakmori stood up, his massive form dominating his section of the chamber. The proud warrior's earlier breakdown during the crisis had been deeply humiliating, but he had learned from it. "The human Major Bae could have retreated when separated from his unit," Grok Tar rumbled. "Any Drakmori warrior would have done so. It is what our training teaches us. But he continued alone because humans can do what we cannot. carry the strength of their entire people within themselves. Queen Speaker Zithara of the Vectar added her own observation. During the crisis, my people and I acted like frightened insects, building meaningless barriers against imaginary threats. But Ambassador Taemin continued his work as if nothing had changed. This is not courage. It is capability we simply do not possess. Ambassador Taemin finally stood to address the chamber. His voice was calm and measured, carrying the authority that came from 2 centuries of proven human reliability. The Council grants humans the right to walk alone, because it understands something that took us many years to prove, he said. We can be trusted to make the right decisions even when isolated, even when betrayed, even when abandoned by our allies. Not because we are better than other species, but because evolution gave us the tools to function independently while maintaining our principles. He looked around the chamber, making eye contact with delegates from dozens of different worlds. Today's vote on admitting new species will proceed as scheduled. I will cast humanity's vote based on our assessment of each species' character and potential contribution to the Council. I will not need to consult with Earth Command or request guidance from human advisors. The confidence in his voice was absolute, and every being in the chamber understood why. Taemin carried the entire weight of human civilization within his individual decision-making process. He was not just a representative, he was humanity itself, condensed into a single person but losing none of its essential nature. The voting proceeded smoothly. Each species took time to reconnect with their home worlds, to rebuild consensus, to ensure that their decisions reflected the collective will of their people. But when it came time for the human vote, Taemin simply stood and spoke. Earth votes to admit the Naltari, whose peaceful nature and scientific contributions will benefit all, he announced.